Hey now, or hey meow.
Hey,
What's up,
meow.
Adam?
Hey, how you doing?
So today's hilarious day. Jabal Bowman, our
Jabal?
friendly neighborhood
Jabal?
fire instructor, got lost his election pretty handily by 19 points.
What? Really? Oh man.
Yes,
He got
yes,
destroyed.
he did. He
Destroyed.
annihilated. So we're gonna talk about that. Also, you on the watch. We had some clips that you pulled from the Dave Smith Andrew Wilson
Yeah.
debate.
Yeah. They argue over gay marriage and also they argue over like objective morality, which is always fun for us. So should be fun
Hmm.
to check in and talk about it. Should be cool.
But the first thing here is if you bring up, I don't know if you have my screen share up or not, but
I have it up. I do.
so we covered on Sunday, we covered this individual, this Anthony Gramuglia video, where he spent about 48 minutes bad mouthing, live deceptively editing YouTubers like Literature Devil and things of that nature. So he found out about this. He wasn't very happy. And this was his response on Twitter. He
Oh
said,
my God. I have not seen
"Oh,
this.
you didn't
This
see
is
this? Okay."
no, this is
Yeah,
awesome.
he responded on Twitter. He said, I was just informed that there is an 8.5 hour long stream also about my video that brings up the total to over 48 hours of content, trying to refute my 48-minute video, and I have little interest in watching any of it. Oh, oh, oh. Now, this is behind.
Oh my
Now, mind you, this is
God.
behind a block. I am blocked by this individual. You are blocked by this individual. He blocked me before we ever even did the stream. So I don't know. I don't know what caused that, but probably he has like one of those block bots or something. So
Yeah, I mean, Ethan Van Sciver follows me, and I follow Ethan Van Sciver, and I guess he's an old nemesis of
mm,
Ethan Van Sciver. He's been arching EVS for 10 years now or something. So
right.
that's he might have me blocked because of that.
Mhm.
So
And
yeah, the
also,
block bot usually goes around, right?
right. So I made fun of him for this, and then also underneath his reply, I have like a separate Twitter account so I can look at people's who block me
Oh,
or block
nice.
us. Underneath it was this individual, the Nerd Skull Woke Moralist. Now, apparently, this guy is some like old anti-gamergator from a billion years ago. His avatar looks like vaguely familiar, but I don't know much about him. He's like, LMAO, those two are some of the biggest Nazi losers in streaming.
Oh, Nazis were being called now.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
You and I were the
Not
big Nazis.
right. Oh yeah.
Also, he has me blocked. So, you know, there it
Yeah.
is.
Well, look,
So,
I will be defending people's right to get gay married today. So
there you go.
not a very
Based.
Nazi position,
I
I
know.
know.
I know.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
also,
Freedom.
that's also pretty funny. So apparently, and I don't want to zoom in on the picture here, because it's probably not safe for YouTube. But
Hmm.
you know how there was like all those weird comics of basically people engaged in gay sex or homosexual sex acts, and they were in these like very pro LGBT books or comic books, and they were in some school libraries.
Yeah,
And
I do recall
yeah,
that.
you know, like Tim Pool would bring it up and he'd be like, "Do you support this, Emma? Emma, do you support this?" Or he'd do it to Lance or whatever. And so apparently Anthony here, he's a big fan. He's in favor of that being in school. He doesn't see a problem with any of those. Okay, usually the people are like, "Oh yeah, I agree. I don't want like depictions of blowjobs in my schools." But Anthony, he's all in favor of it, and he compared it to Catcher in the Rye, Scarlet Letter, and Romeo and Juliet. He thinks that showing visual depictures of gay sex is the same thing as reading Romeo and Juliet.
What?
Yeah, that's what he
I
said.
mean,
That's
okay.
what he said. Right. So pretty wacky.
I am Romeo and Juliet now. There's hardcore sex in Romeo and Juliet. I mean, I don't recall
Um,
there being any.
no, I don't recall. I mean, I recall them like, talking in their old English way about like people being hot. right? Like locker
Okay.
talk from the 1700s or whatever,
Oh, the old locker room talk,
or
huh?
1600s or whatever. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe that's what he's
There
referring
was
to.
no grab 'em by the pussy going on in
No,
Romeo and
no,
Juliet. Okay, it's
no.
completely G rated.
Right.
So
Now,
I don't know
in the
what he's
movie
talking about.
version, they do show underage tits, which is interesting.
Do
But
they? Oh wow.
yeah, the actress who plays Juliet in like the 70s version is, I think she's like 15 or 16 and she's topless in the movie.
Okay.
So,
I
okay.
remember the 90s version with Leonardo
Will Leo.
DiCaprio.
Yeah,
So,
there's no,
yeah,
I don't believe there's any sex or anything or nudity in that one.
right. They steered clear of the pedophilia.
They did a good job.
Good
Yeah.
for them.
It was the 70s. People didn't care back then. So okay, so that was the Anthony update. So he fat, he mad, he behind block. He said he did what
He
they all do. He
coping and
said
seething.
he's coping and seething. He did what they all do. He said, "Oh, it's too long for me to watch."
I
Cry.
love how they turn it into like a point of pride. Like there is
Yeah.
so much content out there about me. I am so popular. Look
It's
at
ego.
this.
Look, there's so many people that think I suck. Oh, I'm so proud.
People can talk about how badly I suck for 8 hours straight. I'm so proud. I'm going to call my mom.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
Okay, so that's
man.
the update for Anthony. So now we have Jamal Bowman. Jamal Bowman, okay. He lost big time here. Now this number is an old,
Oh,
from
my
early in the
God.
election, but I saw it's a funny meme. So he got annihilated. So here's some tweets I wanna pull up here, of course. Here's the original tweet, the classic. This is
Oh, yeah. This is great. This is
Jamal
great.
going
Look,
for
he
oh
kind of,
wait,
he
what?
kind of pulls the sign down. Like, what is that all about?
Now I do look, I like that he just knocks the second one on the floor. He doesn't even take it with him. He just knocks it down.
How do you not know there's a camera there? What a dipshit.
I know. And remember, he claimed that this was like an accident. He directly lied.
Well,
He's
he
like,
claimed he
"Oh,
was trying to get the door open by
yes.
pulling the fire alarm.
Right.
Well, I mean, if you're trying to get the door open, why don't you go back up to the door
And
and
try
push
it."
on it? Yeah,
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
This
And I
is
mean,
obviously he's lying.
if obviously. So
Yeah. Okay.
this is
So,
Thomas Massey's response to him getting out. He said, "I'm gonna miss our informal chit chats in the hallways." If you recall, Thomas Massey and Jamal got into a shouting match
All the way up until election day on 2024.
in the hallway here. So Thomas Massey rubbing it in his face,
of course,
Yeah,
this is
here we
always
have.
good. You know, politics is a lot like high school, Sitch.
It is. It really is. Yeah. Here we have Emma Vigeland. She's very upset, obviously, about this. She says, "Got to cover Jamal Bowman's insurgent campaign in 2020. I remember telling people about his energy, talent, and sincerity, but it wasn't enough this time in the face of endless pro-genocide cash for Latmer, who will instantly become one of the worst Democrats in Congress."
Oh, it's that pro-genocide cash.
Yes.
That's what swayed the election.
Mm-hmm.
Nice Cope and Sneed, right?
Right. Yes. So expect to hear for the next 2 years endless crying about Latmer and how he's a racist, bigot, genocide, blah 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 blah. All that stuff.
Of course.
So here, let me turn the music off here so we don't get hit with a copyright here. So this is AOC doing an event for Jamal. Okay, Jamal Bowman. Look,
Oh,
tell me if
yeah.
you yeah, look at this. Woo! Look, very
Mhm.
exciting.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of music's playing. I don't know. It doesn't seem seems kind of fake, doesn't it? Seems kind of like pathetic.
Like it's AI or something, or
Oh, look, she's pulling her hair out. She's pulling the hair down. That means she's serious.
Usually, I mean, when you're gonna get in a fight, you put your hair up.
Well, that's what's weird, yeah, because like usually when you're gonna do something physically active, you're serious, you put your hair up. You're right. You don't pull it down, so it gets in your face.
Unless you're gonna like bang your head, right? Obviously.
Oh, she's gonna listen to some hard rock. She's gonna do like the head twirl.
Maybe, who knows? She's gonna go full Metalocalypse.
That would be pretty based. Their slogan was "For the many, not the money." You can see it on the front of the
For
bench
the
there.
many, not the money.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Really playing in that Jewish stereotype.
Oh, I didn't think of it that way, but wow. Wow.
You ready to fight?
Are you ready to fight?
You ready to take this borough back? Are you ready to win on state back? Are you ready to win this country back? Are you ready to fight for peace on earth and peace fucking
I mean, this is in her district, right?
No, she's just stumping for him. So
Oh, okay. So it's in his district. Where's his district?
his is New York 16, I believe.
Oh, okay. So it's still New York.
Yeah. No, I mean it's in New York. Yes. So I don't know.
Friendly
I saw
crowd
this.
there.
It seemed pretty cringy to me. Definitely. Like also, it's so weird because so much of this is appealing to the youngins, right? That kind of like campaigning. You're appealing to the youngins. You
Yeah.
got the music. You got
The
screaming
non-voters.
and all this stuff. And those people, they just don't come out to vote in the numbers compared to all the other demographics. It's a bad campaign move to like run directly for the youngest, least likely to turn out voters. Okay. Shocking
Right.
idea, I know.
Yeah. I
This
mean,
is
you
pretty-
don't need to energize me. I mail my ballot in.
There you go. There you go.
Like, I don't need to be energized, right? I get it in the mail, I fill it out, I mail it back.
Right. I thought this was pretty funny too.
Now, y'all, that's what we're doing. Ceasefire now. Let's get it popping. The polls are open today. The polls are open tomorrow. Make sure you get out the vote.
Vote for
Just
me. I'm lying about the Middle East.
I just love ceasefire now. Let's get it popping. So cringe.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, why did he lose? Gee, I don't know. It's got to be because of APAC. Okay, some people really mad about this. He did a lot of cursing. He says fuck APAC. So let's check this out here.
We're not gonna show fucking APAC the power of the motherfucking South Bronx. People ask me why I got a foul mouth. What am I supposed to do? You coming after me. You coming after my family. You coming after my children. I'm not supposed to fight back. I'm not supposed to fight back. We're gonna show them who the fuck we are.
Who's coming after his kids? Like, what's
APAC.
happening here?
The Jews are coming for his children. Okay, they're going to circumcise him.
Oh my God.
I love the
I mean,
windmill arms. Like this is so great. The windmill arms. He's not
He's trying to fly.
like
Leave him alone. He's about to take off.
like normally like when you're doing that move, okay, when you're doing the move, you're trying to get people like pumped, right? You do the up and down. You don't do like the backwards windmill arms like you're trying to fly away, right? It's so funny because people
He's
are
doing the
criticizing this.
hummingbird, man.
He is. People are criticizing this because he's saying fuck the APAC, and I agree. It's totally like lame, unbecoming of a rep and all stuff. But it's also to me super cringe because it feels very fake. It feels like he's doing fake. I don't know anything about his background because he was principal of a school, but it feels like very fake. Like, look how I'm just like you. I'm from the streets of Bronx. I say fuck. I walk around on stage and yell. Like, it just feels so fake.
Yeah. Very try hard.
We're gonna show them who the fuck we are.
So again, cursing. Probably you're gonna appeal to the youngins who don't come out to vote anyway, not the old people.
We know who the fuck we are, Sitch.
Do you? Do you know who the fuck you are?
Just
So-
what you want, right? The guy who's
yeah.
fighting to keep your taxes lower.
Right.
Fighting to
Right.
keep your property taxes from getting insane, right?
Yep.
You know who votes? People who pay property tax.
Yeah, and actually there was some interesting data I saw that like 55% of the people in the district own homes.
Really? Oh my God. There you go. Didn't I just call it?
You did, yeah. 55% of people own homes. It's 9% of the population of the district is Jewish.
Oh my God.
which is one of the largest in the country, obviously.
Oh my God. No wonder he lost by 20. What is this
They
guy,
got
an idiot?
well, so yeah, someone had a really good point. They're saying so not only was he against APAC, but he came out against J Street, which is like a much more like progressive like Jewish pack, I guess. And the problem is there's a lot of Jews, especially, and this is what I was saying, yesterday. And this is why I was like kind of weird when, you listen to Kyle Klinsky or some of the other progressives, they just don't understand like the polling that they're looking at. They're way too blinded by their ideological bias. Yes, the majority of Democrats are in favor of some kind of ceasefire. The majority of Democrats, feel bad for Palestinians, innocent Palestinians getting killed, but the majority of Democrats still believe that Israel has a right to exist. They're not anti-Zionist, and they're still in favor of some kind of two-state solution. And when you have Jamal Bowman and the progressives and all this stuff going, Zionist bad this, Zionist bad that, Israel is the evil empire, that's just a turn off to the overwhelming majority of Democrat voters.
Hey, you sound like a fucking anti-Semite.
That's true too. That's true too.
This whole idea that like they've rebranded Judaism as Zionism. When they say Zionist, I know what they're saying. Okay. It's a very coded language, but they're not fooling anyone.
It doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound great. Yeah. When you say Zionist this, Zionist that. And there was a good tweet. I didn't save it, so I don't know where it is, but someone was like, Jamal Bowman, he has like something like either 100,000 or 300,000 followers on Twitter. Okay. Let's just say he's got 300,000 followers on Twitter. George Latimer, he has like 6,000. All right. Like no Twitter.
That's the guy that smoked him.
Right. Yeah. Me and Adam, each individually have like, way more followers on Twitter than this guy. Right. And yet George Latimer won by 19 points till he smoked him. And so the point, again, that politicians need to wrap in their mind, that, internet pundits need to wrap in their mind, or to wrap their mind around, I should say, is that Twitter politics is not real life. Jamal Bowman had 300,000 Twitter followers. This guy had 6,000 and he annihilated him. Twitter politics does not translate into real life support.
Well, because of this little spatial issue, right? He's got 6,000 followers that are probably all in his district. Jamal Bowman has 300,000 that are all over the world, right? He's probably got 10 people in his district.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're going to be hearing a lot of the progressives complaining about AIPAC, and they're going to be blaming AIPAC for the loss. Frank Luntz here says, famous conservative, I don't know if I say conservative, famous Republican pollster who's kind of turned, I guess, more centrist-y recently, says Jamal Bowman lost his primary because of AIPAC, but not in the way he thinks. Focusing your campaign on attacking AIPAC instead of offering solutions for local issues is not how you win an election for a congressional district.
True.
Which is very true. True.
Yeah. Everyone knows their local congressman.
Yes. And this is an interesting point because people are going back and forth about how much the money really affected it, including Chris Hayes, host of MSNBC show. And here we have Sarah Isker, an ABC News commentator, saying causation problem. A, money hasn't been predictive in federal elections since 2016, which is pretty fascinating. And B, did the money cause the winning or did the winning cause the money? In this case, Bowman was down 17 points when the money started pouring in. Causation seems to point the other way. So we see this a lot too when people look at the whole like, oh, the person that gets all the money wins. It's like, yeah, but that part of the reason people support him is because he's already winning, and people like to support people that they think are going to win.
Yeah, because they like to know that they can call the soon-to-be congressman. They're basically buying his ear once he gets into office. Yeah.
Right,
why would you want to spend your money on the guy who loses? Like you're not going to, he's not going to answer your phone call, right?
Right.
They know, these congressmen know, when they pick up the phone, they know if you wrote them a $2,000 check.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be real here.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Their little sister comes on and says like, oh, like, Johnny 2000 is on the phone for you,
Yeah. Johnny, the guy who gave $2,000 to your opponent in the last election.
Yeah. Now, it is important, though, to say that not only did AIPAC spend, I think, some record amount, like $14 million on Latimer here, but they also, this is like the most amount of money, I think, spent on a single House seat so far in this election.
Wow.
So that is true. There definitely was a lot of money throwing in. But again, he's already down 17 points before the money started coming in. I think it ended with him being down 17 to 19 points. So maybe all that money got him another 2 points. Maybe it's not that significant.
Yeah, they always get the causation wrong on this stuff. The money and politics stuff.
But here's the real reason Bowman lost. Look, he violated the number one rule, Adam. Okay.
He wore a stupid helmet.
He wore a stupid helmet.
Look
he
at
went
that.
full Dukakis. Okay,
Look at that.
Look at that. Never go full Dukakis, people. That's the rule. Never, when you're running for office, never put on a stupid hat or helmet. All right.
I mean, that helmet looks like a Nazi helmet.
Ooh, yeah. You know what? That's a good point. That's a great point. You could have easily just, Photoshop a little SS on there. Have him talking about Israel and AIPAC.
Looks like he's standing back and standing by.
Yeah.
He's ready. He's ready to join the Proud Boys.
He's ready. He's ready. So this is what Bowman said after he lost. Okay.
Oh, this is what I want
do you think
right
he had
here.
like a gracious, I need to reevaluate my campaigning, or
let's milk this lol cow for all it's worth?
Yeah, of course not.
We should not be well adjusted to a sick society. We should be outraged. We should be outraged when a super PAC of dark money can spend $20 million to brainwash people into believing something that isn't true. We should be outraged about that. We should be outraged when, unfortunately, some so-called Democrats are aligning themselves with radical, racist, right-wing Republicans. We should be outraged about that.
I mean, isn't he the one calling everyone Zionist? I mean, what's he talking about?
Well, and he did say that, AIPAC is brainwashing people, right?
Yeah.
Playing into the Jewish stereotype that there's an evil Jewish cabal brainwashing people behind the scenes.
Yeah, you're out here promoting the JQ, dude. What do you think?
It was so funny. There was like a Mehdi Hassan clip, maybe we'll find at some point, where he was criticizing. It's like the self-awareness is zero for Mehdi Hassan. In one breath, he's criticizing, saying it's so wrong that people say that if you're anti, Israel, anti-apartheid state, anti-genocide, that it makes you automatically anti-Semitic. And then the next sentence is literally like, the people on the left are against Israel because, they don't want a genocide. The people on the right are against Israel because they hate the Jews.
Oh,
It's
ironic.
just like, oh my God.
Ironic.
It was so good.
And that is why we have so much work still to do.
There you go. We always got work to do, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, you got Monday off, so
There you go.
maybe you can put some time in, make some phone calls.
So here's AOC today after Jamal Bowman lost. And I just wanted you to get yourself a woman that looks at you the way AOC looks at Jamal Bowman.
That's sad because, I mean, she's married to some other dude, so.
I was going to say, man, if I was AOC's husband, I'd be like,
Isn't she married to a white guy? I believe she is.
She is married to a white guy. Yeah, I'd be like, honey, do we have to have a conversation? Like, what the fuck is going on in this picture?
It's always odd that these super racist people are are like married to a white guy.
That's like the meme is like, yeah, like, racist woman of color married to a very, very white person.
Interracial marriage among the racist.
Right. And then, of course, I had to bring up the most hilarious picture. This was the picture.
I know.
CNN.
For real? So this is a guy?
This is
the guy that beat him? This guy's from Monty Python. What's going on with these eyes? I've seen this guy before.
I couldn't believe CNN pulled this up. They got the worst lazy eye picture imaginable. He's like Jamal Bowman beaten by a googly-eyed Mr. Potato Head.
Oh my God.
Oh,
look.
terrible.
He's got eyes out for the voters here. He can see him coming from any direction.
That should have been his campaign slogan.
I'm looking
I've
out
got
for
my
you.
eyes on everyone in the district. Keeping my eyes out for all issues. Nothing
That-
escapes my vision.
That would be great.
Oh my god.
I mean, I do like this guy already.
Well, you see, yeah, you like women with like really wide apart eyes. You like guys with like the worst lazy eyes ever.
I mean, look, he can look around corners.
That's true. He was very useful in a war zone. He could see around all directions. He can't sneak up on him. He's like a chameleon. So there you go. There you go. Okay.
That's great.
All right, that was it.
Amazing.
All right.
That was great stuff. All right, we got our politics fixed. Now we're gonna cover our morality. I always say moral systems, but I think moral systems is probably too triggering for people. What's a better way to talk about morality? People don't like thinking about morality in terms of a system. Like, oh my God, it's like sacrilege.
Like your moral. Why don't really people don't like talking about moral systems?
Yeah, every time I mention moral system, there's comments that seem to be triggered by it.
Interesting. I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, moral philosophy, maybe. Moral
that's probably
ideology.
better.
Moral philosophy is probably the best. TL1524 says must have missed the Romeo and Juliet quote of quote Romeo, oh Romeo, let me bloweth thy Romeo. What is this take? Yeah, I don't know. Very strange. Red Toad, thank you so much for the $5. This is probably a bit slow on the uptick here on my part, but where does the name BreadTube even come from? Why bread? I thought commies don't have food. So there's like a socialist paper that's called what was it called? There was like something of bread, like to eat bread or something of that effect. Do you remember what it was called? I'm sure someone
No,
said.
I don't know this.
I've never read it.
I just thought it was all because, like that's all they have
the
in the
conquest of
marketplace
bread.
is
Peter
bread.
Kropotkin's work titled "The Conquest of Bread." Never read it. Don't know what the fuck it says, but that's where the title comes from.
I thought it had to do with bread lines, like waiting in line for bread.
That's why. So obviously the socialists are really bad at marketing, because when you hear BreadTube, you know that they're socialist. That's instantly what everyone thinks about. Yeah. They think, oh, I'm waiting in a bread line because I'm in a socialist country.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So
horrifying.
You know, it's funny. If you go to like YouTube, WikiTube, and they have like the BreadTube, like you look up BreadTube, it has a list of YouTubers considered BreadTube. And underneath it, you have Armored Skeptic.
What? Really?
You have Destiny. And you have Shoe on Head are all apparently considered RedTubers, which is an interesting thing there. So
Shoe seems to be a capitalist, so
yeah, I don't think so. Also,
I guess she does call herself. I guess she does call herself a socialist.
I thought she was a sock
democratic sock dem. Is that it?
Yeah.
All right.
Dameling for 3 months says Karl Marx is a historically famous philosopher, but no one ever mentioned his sister Anya, the inventor of the starting pistol. Wait, really? That's crazy and weird. Oh, well, there you go. That's pretty cool, I guess. J Macker Circuit Fire, thanks so much for $20. Says, look, this is all cringe, but I do have some respect for Jamal doing reps of 405 on the bench. Republicans do themselves a major disservice by not being the party of gains. That's true. I mean, like, listen, he's huge. He's maybe he's juicing, who knows? Some people were saying it on Twitter. Libertarian Trap for 21 months. Thank you so much. Says, I'm shocked I tell you that Jamal lost his election in a majority Jewish district. Yes, of course. D5280 for 8 months says, marriage, the union of a man and woman with openness to a new life, foundational to our civilization, led to human flourishing. To dismiss that is silly. So
I'm not dismissing that.
I don't think anyone's dismissing that. I think it's silly to say, well, therefore people that are gay and not going to be involved in a heterosexual relationship should not also be able to partake in a socially stabilizing marriage contract.
Yeah.
And no one has ever really provided a good explanation for that other than making these like kind of strange either snowball arguments about it's going to lead to something worse, or just saying it's a definition, which isn't really an argument. So
yeah. I don't think you can choose what you're attracted to. And I just like, obviously female brains are made predominantly to be attracted to males, and male brains are made predominantly to be attracted to females. But sometimes nature screws up, and you get a female who's attracted to females or a male who's attracted to males.
Whoa, you said screws up. I can't believe you.
Sexually. And I just, the solution for that is not to force those people to live horrible, unfulfilling lives. I mean, why not just let them hook up with one another? It doesn't seem to be hurting anyone. So,
well, and it's also, you'd think like when people are married, again, it leads to them, being more stable, being with one person, all these. They were made grace. So
no one can hear that but you, Sitch. Just
oh,
so you know.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, I can hear Wormy in the background going.
He's in a very grumpy mood today.
He is. He wants his Adam. Okay, he wants cuddle.
But yeah, so look. This debate is interesting to me because, I mean, it seems pretty obvious Andrew is an authoritarian. Andrew has a certain kind of moral aesthetic that he feels it's his duty to foist on the world by any means necessary, which, I mean, I don't like that, Sitch. How do you feel about that? People telling you what to do.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen any content from Andrew. I don't really know anything about him whatsoever.
Yeah. I have seen content. I was looking, he did a debate with Brianna Wu where it seemed he was trying to make the argument that black people shouldn't be able to own guns because of the black criminal rate.
Wow. It's not going to be a popular.
Yeah, exactly. I was looking for the live stream, but I can't seem to find it on his channel anywhere. So I don't know if it's unlisted or not. And I tried to explain to him the ecological fallacy, right? Where you can't infer about individuals different traits based on statistics about the groups that individual is a part of, right? Obviously, there are law-abiding citizens who are black that would like to own firearms, right? And they would get caught up in Andrew's prohibition,
right?
So what? I mean, I don't know why you would advocate for something like that, right?
I don't either.
I mean, a lot of Catholic priests are pedos, right? But we can't call all of those Catholic priests pedos.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's some that are not.
Yes. Moondoggy for $10 says you should check their ad campaign. I get it all the time. Being in New York, they don't sound that different from each other. Are you saying whose ad campaign? You're saying Latimer's and Jamal Bowman's were the same? I saw like one Bernie ad that Ben Shapiro played up, which I thought was super cringy. Where it was a lot of yelling, AOC and Bernie yelling about like, well, we're gonna fight a billionaires on a billionaires. He's gonna fight for the people. Blah 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 blah. But I haven't seen any of Latimer's ads. Holtzinator for $5. Thank you so much. Says quote, or no, it doesn't say quote. That's just what the Streamlabs says. Sitch. When I hear progressives use Zionists, they usually mean it. They usually use it to mean Jews who think Israel has a right to conquer Palestine, not that Israel has a right to exist. They also tend to see Israel as the aggressor. So I know that obviously they tend to see Israel as the aggressor. So progressives are fucking retarded. And I'm going to tell you why. They keep adopting radical leftist language that means something very extreme and then saying it doesn't mean that very extreme thing. So obviously we saw this with the defund the police, which was a slogan that was created by radical leftists who don't believe police should exist whatsoever. And like dumbass progressives adopt this slogan. And then when you're like, well, you want to get rid of the police? They go, no. It doesn't mean that. It just means I want to reform something. And it's the same thing with this anti-Zionist thing. To be anti-Zionist definitionally means that you're against the right of the state of Israel to exist. And when the people started pushing this, the radical leftists are pushing this, who created this, this mantra, they mean specifically they don't believe that Israel has the right to exist. And then you have like dumb fuck progressives who maybe don't agree with that, and they adopt language and they go, no, it means something else. And it's like, okay, listen, maybe you don't mean that, but you're just a fool for adopting that language. You're just a dumb fool for adopting that language. So
yeah, look, it reeks of a slur. And the way they say it like a slur.
Right.
Right?
They do.
I mean, I can say I love you in a way that I really mean fuck you. I mean,
sure.
Yeah. Sure. The intention is rather clear when they start talking about the Zionists.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
let's move on. You said you got some time codes for this. I only watched like an hour of this debate. It's pretty grueling. I think I talked about it yesterday. So
yeah, my big question is like this intro argument. I want to get your feedback on.
Okay.
Because it seems like a non sequitur to me, a giant non sequitur. So
have you watched this whole debate?
I didn't watch the Q&A.
Okay.
But you watched the debate
portion. But you watched up to the Q&A part.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The beginning is just this whole argument that transpires. I mean, I have answers for everything going on. It doesn't seem like they really want to answer one another. So obviously we'll lay out our positions.
Right.
But I don't. Andrew's position seems like a non sequitur to me. So I want to get your take, obviously.
Yep. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dave, for coming into tonight's debate. I appreciate it. I want to let you know the reason I'm having this debate with you is because I think I can bring you to the dark side of the force. And you're already halfway there. My hope is to convince you to get to the rest of the way there. Libertarianism is, in the end...
It seems really what he's arguing for is, Dave Smith, I want you to be an authoritarian like me. Even Dave Smith is a libertarian. Like, that's so far away from this authoritarian premise that Andrew has. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And
does he
a system which inevitably...
what Christian populism is at any point in this conversation? Because I watched an hour of it, and none of it was on what Andrew believed. It was all just attacking libertarian ideas.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't like. He basically presses this position on Dave Smith.
Mm-hmm.
That just is. I mean, it's a non sequitur in the way that I see it. So
okay,
leads to degeneracy. The reason libertarian is to convince you to get to the rest of the way there. Libertarianism is, in the end, a system which inevitably leads to degeneracy. The reason libertarians currently have a Skittles nominee for president is because the very ideology itself is corrupt. It starts with the very core idea on which all other ideas are based, which is self-ownership.
So self-ownership leads to degeneracy.
Okay.
I know this is a doctrine that Mr. Smith does believe, because I have seen him reference it multiple times in multiple appearances, most recently on Reason TV, in his case against open borders. It's a failing dogma because it opens up the ultimate can of worms. If people really do own themselves, then we really can't engage with any voluntary actions they take with each other and stop them, overrule them, or force them not to do those actions.
So if people own themselves, we can't intervene and, hold them accountable for moral indiscretions or breaking the law, right?
Well,
murdering
he's saying
somebody.
I think he's saying that you can't stop people for voluntary actions. So anything that, as long as you're acting in a way that's not infringing upon someone else, or as long as the parties involved are saying, yes, we voluntarily consent to this action, then you can't stop them. Right. That's his argument.
This is exactly why Skittles in society exists. By this logic, we can't outlaw incest, prostitution. We can't outlaw gay marriage. We can't outlaw polygamy. We can't even outlaw unaliving yourself. All things which Christian ethics point to as absolutely immoral. Dave can't really say that they are, though. They have to be allowed if you own yourself, or it would be a violation of the self-ownership doctrine. It's nice and all that Mr. Smith has distanced himself from the failure that is the modern Libertarian Party, and I applaud him for doing it, but ultimately, the very reason he had to is because of this reason. it always leads to the absurd outcome of mass degeneracy. It has to. There's no way around it. Dave assumes, for reasons I don't understand, that his solution of non-promotion yet legalization somehow better than the alternative of the state utilizing authority to remove these moral plagues. I want the state busting up prostitution rings and pimps. I want them arresting incest practitioners, and I want them to arrest polygamists. I want them to use force to prevent unaliving of oneself. The anarcho-capitalist, in this case Dave, can't justify the state really doing any of those things. The Christian ethicist can, striking a key balance between what he would call totalitarianism and what are considered freedoms. For us, though, Mr. Smith.
What's up? You're muted. Unmute.
Has outlined a plan, one he often repeats. His plan is to have libertarians move into positions of governance in order to take control of key systems and then abolish them eventually, in hopes that we eventually get to some kind of anarcho-capitalist society over time. He says this because, quote, the perfect is the enemy of the good. This means, of course, that because a thing isn't perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't move to what's better, even if what's better isn't perfect. So that the audience knows, this is also the exact plan of socialists. They also want to seize government institutions, abolishing power over time, in order to end up with a stateless society, just like Dave wants. It's amusing to note that ultimately what both sides are really fighting over is the power of the state and the use of its force. It's hilarious to me that Christians have fallen for any libertarian dogma at all. We have every right to rule as much as the secularists, and the right to wield state power how we see fit to exercise our will, just as the libertarian Mr. Smith wants to do himself.
It's not authoritarian, Sitch.
Well, I guess we got. I don't know what is he proposing. I guess that's part of the problem. Because
He's
I listened to an hour of
proposing-
this and I never got to what Andrew wants.
He's proposing wielding the power of the state to end degeneracy.
Right. I understand that part, obviously. So yeah. Which,
Obviously, the definition of his, the way he defines degeneracy is how he wants to wield the state, right?
Mm-hmm. Presumably, yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't think he ever really defines degeneracy. They do kind of veer off into the gay marriage thing, which makes me think he's against gay marriage because it's degenerate.
Yeah.
And
Well,
he
I mean,
wants to wield the power of the state to make gay marriage illegal. So.
Yeah, it seems like he was, the ones he kind of talked about, things that would fall under degeneracy under Christian dogma.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is like
some of them you'd agree with, obviously, like incest, but we wouldn't agree with, gay marriage.
some of them are literally illegal, like suicide already,
Yes.
right?
Suicide already is illegal.
Polygamy, illegal.
Right.
Incest, illegal.
Yep.
Like we've already agreed as a society, we're already using the state to break up those things. The reason why he's making this argument is there's a few things like gay marriage
Mm-hmm.
that he wants the state to come in and make illegal, right?
Right.
He's basically
right.
advocating for that. The thing that I think is the non sequitur here is the argument that he's making to Dave that self-ownership somehow has anything to do with this. Like we'll just let him get into the social convention stuff. Then we'll wait.
And as the socialists want to do. Mr. Smith definitely can't argue we shouldn't. As if traditional Christians were in power, society would certainly be better than it is now. And, well, if it's not perfect, well, perfection is the enemy of the good. Christian ethics is a superior system of justification, starting points, which reject libertarian axioms, including that of self-ownership, on which the non-aggression principle must base itself. I'd like to see Dave demonstrate for us that self-ownership is true. I'm willing to be convinced, but thus far I most certainly am not. I'd like him to finally clarify his oughts, and if...
See, and then he comes in and he's like, okay, you have to prove to me that self-ownership is objectively true. Obviously, we talked about this before. Self-ownership is a social convention, right?
Well,
it's not true in the same way gravity is a fact of nature.
Right. So now Dave, at least part that I saw, Dave was completely ill-equipped to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Which was kind of surprising to me. But my guess would be that when Andrew's talked to other libertarians and other libertarians have talked to us and got mad about this, because we both have the position that natural rights are a useful fiction, which is the idea that it's beneficial that society and the government has an idea that people are born with natural inalienable rights. And I think that's a great foundation for a government, society, legal system to be based on. I'm totally in favor of all that. But if you're to ask me, do I think it's objectively true that you could somehow say people have a quote, like natural right to self-ownership or however you want to phrase it? I'm like, well, I don't know if that's like real, right? And so maybe that's why he's framing it this way, is because he's expecting Dave to sort of to make that argument, to say that there's some kind of objective natural right of self-ownership that is somehow, you know, like a product of humans existing or something. And maybe that's why he's sort of doing all this.
Yeah, like it's a social convention above all, but believing that it's a property of the natural world, that it's objectively true, lowers the enforcement cost because you have everyone kind of saying, yes, oh yeah, this is factually correct. It's the same idea that, you know, if I jump off the edge of the Grand Canyon, I'm going to die, right? Like if you think this is a fact of nature and bad things are going to happen if I break that, then nobody's going to break it. You don't have to worry about the security costs of enforcement. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is like, obviously if the argument is that something is rooted in nature, in reality itself, it makes it easier for the social or for society to enforce it. Yeah, the convention to form around to enforce it. But my problem with, I guess, Andrew's argument, and the part I listened to, they never really got into it, is that it kind of doesn't matter, because if Americans or libertarians, but Americans broadly, do believe in the idea of natural rights, and I think that's great, how, you know, even if you can't prove it, even if you can't objectively prove somehow with logic or whatever that humans have this natural rights of self-ownership, I mean, you can't prove God exists either. And so, like, if your moral system, your convention is based on, you know, saying, well, there is a divine truth about God, but you can't prove it, how is that different than saying that your moral philosophy is based upon natural rights, which you also can't prove, even though they're both embedded in nature or reality itself?
This is why it's such a huge non sequitur, because you don't have to prove it.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't change anything about the situation. Like, I guess he could argue that if you could prove it, you would lower the security costs of enforcement even more, right?
Well, not the security costs, but you lower or you make it, I guess, easier to perpetuate the ideology if you could prove it factually, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what Andrew's attempting to do. So. Sure. But it's just,
but he can't prove his ideology factually either, so I don't understand what the point is.
Yeah, that's where the non sequitur is.
Right.
Like, this really has nothing to do with what the ideology will produce. In that, you know, if we all follow this set of rules, there is going to be some kind of objective outcome that we can measure. Like, there's all kinds of different metrics that people use to measure them. So how you enforce that ideology is completely separate from what that ideology will produce if everyone buys into it and shares the ideology and creates a society and lives by these rules, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's where I see the non sequitur. It's like you have enforcement and then you have the law. The laws are separate from the enforcement aspect of the law.
If incest ought be allowed, if it isn't reproductive, if homosexual marriage ought be allowed, if polygamous marriages ought be allowed, and if unaliving yourself ought be allowed. Anytime in the past I have seen Dave pushed on these ought claims, he's somewhat evasive and dodgy. And I think it's time to get clear positions and note what he actually does want in society, not as preferences go, but as his ought of self-ownership demand people be allowed to do. With no evasion, tell us what is true, that you do believe prostitutes ought to be able to be prostitutes if they want, that those who want to unalive ought to be able to do that, that polygamists ought to be able to marry as many people as they want, that Skittles people ought to be able to get married, that drug use ought to be legal regardless of the drug. I'd like to get into these distinct philosophies. I think that's enough for us to start with And with that, I'll yield my time to Dave.
Okay, I'm just going to skip forward to where he starts getting into his response.
Okay. Metal Face Rose for $2 says, Dave Smith, my third favorite Legion of Skanks host. There you go. RBGH fan for $10 says, Wilson is debating from a solipsistic view. I have objective truth because my doctrine. Then throws his own ideology under the bus with a gotcha incest question when his ideology is predicated on.
Yeah, look, I don't like this tactic, and I do look. I think Andrew just oozes authoritarian. Like he's like he's ready to enforce his ideology on you, whether you like it or not, which I just rubs me the wrong way, obviously. So,
the joke was there's only 3 Legion of Skanks hosts, so you're saying it's his third favorite. Gotcha.
Okay.
Anyway,
or 2. I would just say in response to some of the things you said there, the idea of libertarianism and self-ownership does not at all imply that anyone is allowed to do whatever they want to do. And it certainly doesn't imply that you can't say something as horrifically immoral, even if it doesn't violate the principle of self-ownership. Certainly property rights would be a great example of where someone wouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want to do if they were on someone else's property who didn't wish to allow them to do that.
So you're saying his argument is that you're allowed to do whatever you want to do as long as you don't hurt somebody else. And he's saying that there's a lot of gray areas where you can do terrible, detestable things, but you're not technically hurting someone else. And he keeps relying on the incest example.
Right. Well, I would say, I wouldn't use the word hurting. I'd use the word that Andrew used, consent. Right.
But he actually goes on to say, you know, he's talking about incest in the context of them not being able to reproduce. So he's basically acknowledging that could harm people in the world.
Right.
So.
He brings forward I'm assuming he's read Righteous Mind or something, because he brought forward 2 of the height moral questions. Can you fuck a chicken you're going to eat? And you have 2 gay siblings who are adults, have sex, right? Which are both in the moral.
I never
foundation.
heard the fuck a chicken, but
that's in Righteous Mind, isn't it?
No, it is in Righteous, but I never heard Andrew say it. So I only heard him say incest.
I could have.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm just headcaning that, but I could have swore he brought it up, or maybe no. Wait, we listened to someone else recently brought it up. Okay, anyway, I guess it makes sense. But yeah, he brings up the incest question. So, but the reason, he's trying to frame it in a way, but this is why I say Dave Smith is completely unequipped to have the conversation, is because Dave Smith keeps saying, like, why do you keep bringing up, like, the age? Like, why does that matter? And the fact that he doesn't understand, well, the reason it matters is because Andrew's trying to he's trying to circumvent the harm question, right? That you brought up, Adam. That's why he's saying, like, oh, they're gay and they're above age, right?
Yeah. He admits that he's trying to circumvent the harm
but that's
question.
Exactly. That's the point. Because what he's trying to get at, I guess, this is why, like, I think this debate is super unproductive, is that there's Andrew could just explain what his point is instead of doing this, like, coy sort of like, I'm just going to keep asking you questions and try to lead you down like a trap or a pathway. Yeah. And like when that's not working, because Dave Smith either is pretending to be ignorant or just is ignorant of like how to have a conversation about this, you can just be very specifically say, like, okay, well, if, how does libertarianism as a philosophy say that, 2 22-year-old men shouldn't be having gay sex with each other when they're brothers, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Look, and if you're also, it's such a non sequitur to me to say that if the only moral systems that are going to produce good results have to be objectively true, like what? How does that make any sense?
Well, nothing. I mean, you can't prove any morality is objectively true.
No moral systems. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
None of them. All moral systems are social conventions.
Right.
Does he think his moral system is objective? I get he
Well,
probably
he does,
right?
obviously, yeah. As a very religious Christian, I would
But
imagine. So.
he gives in though and says that his moral system is the social convention too.
He
It's
does, which I
subjective.
was surprised to hear and confused that he said it then, because then I didn't understand what the point of the question was.
So, but that makes it a total non sequitur then. It's like,
Right.
okay, we agree that moral systems are subjective,
Right.
social conventions. Now we can look at those moral systems, and it's like the rules of society. You can look at like the rules of sports. Like you can create tons of different games, right? Some games are going to be more entertaining than other games, right? You can judge them on a metric of popularity.
Right.
Like moral systems, people tend to judge on, how productive the society is, right? How painful it is to live in the society.
Right.
There are all these emergent facts. The suicide rate is an emergent fact. I mean, you can look up the suicide rate in any one of these nations, right? They keep track of it for a reason. So that is objective, right?
Yep. Sure.
So this whole line of inquiry is like, dude, and they stick to it for so long. It's kind of hilarious.
I know.
I think that a lot of the later stuff we probably have to get into in the back and forth and when we're asking each other questions. I think there are lots of examples of degeneracy that you could bring up and ask whether I think we ought to be allowed to do them or not. The question to me isn't so much whether we ought to be allowed to do them. It's how society ought to treat them and what exactly has led us to the point where these awful things are so celebrated. So I'm sure there'll be more time to get into all of these things, but
so how society should treat them. He's talking specifically about the enforcement mechanism. And this is what I think Dave objects to most. He's like, I don't want the state enforcing it because someone like Andrew could come along and say, I want the state to enforce my moral preferences on everyone by force.
Right.
And if his moral preferences are some strange concoction, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to suffer under that system, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this whole, how are we in the place where this stuff is celebrated? I mean, because people want to fight. People see Andrew and they think authoritarian and they want to basically fight against Andrew. And the way to fight against Andrew is to celebrate things that Andrew finds morally degenerate.
Right.
That's what's going on. That's the culture war. That's why it's celebrated. It's celebrated because there's people like Andrew.
I would just say that I think from what I'm hearing at the beginning here, there's a big misunderstanding of what exactly it is I stand for, and also what kind of the tradition of resisting centralized authoritarian control is really all about. But I'm happy to talk more about this.
All right. Opening.
See, ironic, huh? Resisting authoritarian control. As Andrew's like, yeah, damn right. I want to take that state. Day one, no more gay marriage. Look, and that is so wrong to me because of your personal aesthetic, because you want to go to bed at night knowing that no gay people are allowed to get married. Other people can't live the lives that they want to live. That's just so repugnant to me.
Well, I think when I listened to this part of the debate that I listened to, what I came away with is, and it's kind of why I find these debates stupid and obnoxious, is that having, like, whenever people have these like ideological debates in this vacuum, they're arguing this like pure form of the ideology. And I think that's the problem. In reality, you can't structure a society around a pure form of an ideology. That's never going to work because real life is messy and based on a series of compromises. And you sort of have to feel things out. I don't think reality is so neat, at least no one's discovered it yet. I don't think reality is so neat that anyone's crafted the perfect ideological rule book that you just like throw down and say, okay, like this has all the answers, you just follow this. Because like looking at the whole self-ownership libertarian thing, like while you could definitely make arguments under libertarianism, under the NAP about why, adult brothers should not be able to engage in incestual sex. You can definitely make those arguments exist, and I think we've made them on the show before, and we talked about them and all this stuff. But you don't really, in my opinion, you don't really need to, because the way you should look at society is say, okay, here's the foundation of which we start. We start and we say, let's say that America is a country rooted in liberalism, and let's say that the first foundation is, if you ask yourself, can you do an action or should something be illegal? You say, okay, does this harm someone else? Right?
Yep.
And if the answer is yes, then okay, then maybe we should regulate it. Maybe we should make it illegal. Not always, but maybe, because you have a situation like, again, cheating on someone harms someone, but doesn't necessarily mean it should be illegal, right? We already have an exception.
Yep.
But that's something to consider. But then you say, okay, well, what if it's not really harming someone else directly, like using drugs? Well, should someone be able to do heroin? You say, oh, well, you're not really harming anyone. And then someone says, well, maybe you are. If you're a father and you get addicted to heroin so you can't provide for your family and your children, aren't you harming them? It's like, well, that is true. We all live in a society where everything's connected. So is it even possible for someone to engage in an action that harms themselves or harms someone else that doesn't harm, the society at large? I don't know. That's a complicated question. And so nothing can exist. My point is that nothing can exist in this pure ideological form of like, well, as long as nothing harms someone else, we consent to it, because that's not real. But you can use that as like your foundation, your starting point, and then you have to get into the specifics, and then you have to delve into things. And that's my problem with this conversation, is that they're just having this like wanky, pure form of libertarianism, which isn't like a real thing that can exist in the world.
Yeah, we're trying to balance the rights of the individual versus keeping society afloat, like social cohesion.
Exactly.
Like we don't want society to fall apart. And a lot of people know this intuitively. I mean, a lot of the arguments against gay marriage are arguments that if we allow this level of degeneracy, society will fall apart, right? So I agree with everything that you're saying, Sitch. There's no hard and fast rules. You kind of have to feel it out as you go. They bounce around the slavery question quite a bit, and I think Andrew is bringing it up completely in bad faith because he just wants to say, your ideology allows for slavery. But if you think of the ideology as just, the set of rules governing society, we've had a society where slavery was acceptable. Slavery was not prohibited, right? And we've had a society where slavery was outlawed. And I think all of the objective metrics show that the society without slavery is far more productive, far better society to live in. So sooner or later, you have to start looking at those emergent facts and start judging the society on how those emergent facts play out. The problem that I have with Andrew and his particular, ilk for this kind of reasoning is it's really just like he's focused on his own personal moral aesthetic. It's funny that the debate is over individualism because it's really his like individual aesthetic that he wants to please. There's certain things in the world that offend his moral sensibilities. And he's like, we all need to band together as a society and make society conform to my moral aesthetic so that I can be comfortable in society. And of course, people are going to be like, oh yeah, who cares? Who are you? You're just one guy, right? So he has to come up with arguments why this is going to be the downfall of society, why this is logically incoherent. And it's silly. Like, I agree with everything you're saying about arguing from this like pure philosophical perspective. And it's not realistic. It's not the way people function in the world.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, I would rather have the starting point, like in America, when we have a conversation about whether an action should be legal or not, I'd rather the starting point be liberalism, libertarianism, NAP sort of like areas. I'd rather that be the starting point, and then we can kind of branch off on that to get into specifics about exceptions and things, as opposed to the starting point being, what does the Bible say?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Whether or not it's objectively true or a social convention is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant
Right.
when you're crafting the rules of society.
Sure.
Statements.
You agree, right?
I agree completely.
I
Yeah.
mean, how is it relevant?
I mean, it's only relevant in the way that we said. It's easier to sort of make the argument to adhere to the social.
It's irrelevant for
Contract.
enforcement. This is
Right, for
why
enforcement,
I
yeah.
always split. This is why I always split enforcement. I guess there is a gray area, obviously. Like if you come up with the perfect moral rule set that's going to make the best society possible, like there's no possible way any society could be better, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden you enforce it by draconian means. I mean, then there's some overlap, right? You're like, well, is it the best rule set if we're enforcing it this way?
Well, there is like a psychological thing now. I don't know if this is an innate thing. I don't know if this is more like a recent human convention, but there is a psychological thing that happens in our minds where if we view something as an innate part of nature, it makes people less likely to advocate to change it because they say, well, you can't change it. That's nature. And that's part of why all the socialists, they say everything's a social construct. Like the reason for saying that, first of all, it's pointless because technically the way they define social construct is so broad that everything is a social construct. So it's a meaningless distinction at that
Right.
point. But they
Biological reality is a social construct.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just a definitions game because they define it in such a way. But they say it because they understand that if they can like argue to people that there isn't that their belief system isn't rooted in something innate, something natural, something biological, then they feel like it weakens the argument enough for them to say, well, then we can change it. Right.
Right. Yeah. You're enforcing through mental games instead of force.
Right,
Police
right.
on the beat.
Right. As opposed to just making the argument about, well, why should we change this thing in the first place anyway? Right. Or why should we, even if you're going to make the argument that there's no such thing as a quote biological man or woman, which I disagree with, even if that were true, like, well, why does that mean that we should just suddenly change these categories? And that's the problem is they don't really bring forward a coherent argument as opposed to accept that it harms, they make the harm argument that it harms some tiny minority of people.
Yeah. The environment is constantly changing. And that's why there is such a thing as cultural evolution.
Of course.
Change is actually an asset.
It's done. So I'm going to try to stay out of it as much as possible. We'll let you two go back and forth. You only hear from me if
You own yourself.
because there's too much talking over each other. Other than that, got about an hour, 15 hour, 20 minutes. You guys go ahead.
Dave, can you demonstrate for us how you own yourself?
Well, what exactly do you mean by that?
Do you own yourself?
Yes.
Can you demonstrate that?
I mean, we're both demonstrating it right now on this show.
Well, you're not demonstrating that you own yourself.
What do you mean by own?
Well, I think that ownership of a thing is just a social construction. That ownership itself is just a parameter of agreed upon criteria.
But if you
hang on, let me
See, and this is where everything goes off the rails because that's true. So what does that have anything to do with morality?
finish the point.
Sure.
For which, so that's how we know. So I own that guitar because we agree that I own that guitar. That's it. That's the only reason I own it. I don't think that there's anything that you can point to that would demonstrate that this exists outside of a social construction we agree to.
Okay. Well, I'm missing your point here.
My point is that I think it's a social construction when you say that you own yourself. I don't think that
I didn't say it's not a social construction. But
well, then you don't own yourself?
That's a false binary. I'm not. Hold on.
I mean, I think you could make the argument that ownership isn't there's an element of ownership that is a social construction, but there's an element that appears to be a natural reality, such as he's talking about, he has a guitar there. He can pick it up and he can do whatever he wants with this guitar. Doesn't that just mean that, at least at that moment in time, that he owns that guitar? That is a natural rule.
Sure. I mean, it's it's
And then-
it's irrelevant, but
Right. Now, where the social construct element comes into play is to say, like, well, because he paid money for this guitar and it exists in this location, that no one else has the ability to come and take it from him and, steal ownership away from him. Right. That's the social construction element of the category.
right. It just if it's a social convention, that doesn't change the fact that you're going to get a certain outcome for adopting this social convention society-wide. So you owning yourself, yes, it is a social convention, but it's a social convention that creates liberalism, capitalism,
Right.
like modern Western societies, property rights. Our entire judicial system is based on it. I mean, it creates a certain outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole idea that because Dave can't prove that a part of objective reality is that people own themselves, that changes the outcomes from adopting that as a social convention. It doesn't change anything. So why does he keep hammering on this?
Well, no, Mr. Rukar says the point he's making is that ownership is a concept we assert on property, not a thing inherent to the object. Well, I don't know if he's making, I agree with the second part. I don't know if he's making an argument that you can only assert ownership on property versus yourself. But I don't know, because I think it's, again, to try to say that I thought it was for him to say that his form of morality is rooted in objective divine
reality,
truth.
yeah.
But then he later in this debate seems to acknowledge that it is a social construct to believe that, right? Even if you believe it's an objective truth, you can't necessarily prove it.
Hold on one second.
No. That's the law of logic. You either do or you don't.
No, I didn't say no. You're asking me if I do or I don't. Do you own that guitar?
Yeah.
Okay, but you just said it's a social construct.
Yeah, but I gave you the criteria for the social construct.
Sure, and
Yeah, just because it's a social construct doesn't change the ownership status of it.
Right. Or I thought he was going to make the argument that, God owns people, therefore you have to follow God's will, right? I thought that was going to be maybe an argument, but the part I saw, I didn't make that argument. So
Yeah, he doesn't. It's just like, what is it?
right.
That's why I keep saying it's just a non sequitur. It's completely unrelated.
The point is Dave's morals are arbitrary depending on the time, and Andrew's are absolute because he derives them from a divine power. That's why I thought he was going to make that argument, but he doesn't make that argument. At least he kind of makes the opposite of that argument later. So that's why I was confused.
And I said I own myself.
Right, but when you say
so, as much as you own that guitar, you've proved
this is
nothing.
incorrect. When I say, "Do you own yourself?" and you say, "I'm not sure," law of logic would. Hang on, let me finish.
I said yes.
Yeah, the law of excluded middle is going to show this. It can only be yes or no. Do you have self-ownership? Yes or no. I own the guitar because we agree we do. Do you only own yourself because we agree you do?
Well, I don't agree that that's what ownership means.
And just because it's a social convention, if everyone agrees on the social convention, that doesn't make the social convention arbitrary.
No.
Everyone is in agreement on it. It's like objectively, everyone has agreed on that.
Mm-hmm.
But you said yes and I said yes, so we're both exactly even. And
then I want to know Then I want to know how you own yourself.
Well, look, if you actually look up ownership in like a dictionary, I think the definition that you gave would be a little bit different than that. So, do I exercise my control over myself? Do I do so morally? Yes, I think so. And I actually think that in order for us to even have this conversation, we both have, in a sense, agreed to that principle.
I don't think we have.
It's me versus you.
How have we
do you
agreed?
own the arguments that you're making so far in this conversation?
You don't. How do you own an argument?
No, when I say that, is it yours?
It came out of my mouth. Sure,
are the words you're saying yours?
But how would that make the
mine?
application that I own that thing?
Well, look again. Define own.
I think that the definition of ownership would be a social construct in which you and I, via agreement criteria, decide that X thing becomes property which is assigned to me.
Okay.
Right. And if it's not a social convention, that changes nothing. That changes absolutely nothing about any of this.
Mhm.
How does that change anything, Sitch?
Well, just the enforcement mechanism that we talked about. But
Yeah. So if
by
that's
that
true,
by that definition, do you own yourself?
I would say by the definition of that social construction, I could say that you own yourself, sure.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't mean anything. Let me explain why.
Okay.
Because if the social,
what did we just
because
do this whole time?
let
I'm
me
not
explain.
getting it.
Because if the social construction, what if we change the social construct and we decide that you can own a person, Dave?
Right. Okay. And what if we change the social construct and says I own your guitar?
So I guess he's saying that if it's a social convention, then we can just change that social convention
arbitrarily, right?
right? And
Even though it's not really arbitrarily, but that's a different issue.
Well, it would not be arbitrarily
No.
because if we
Right.
change the social convention in a way that society deteriorates, that would be bad. But
Right.
we
No, but I
would-
just mean like there's biological, social, environmental conditions that lead to these wide scale changes. It's not like a random arbitrary change. But anyway.
yeah, you're making the
Right.
change to try to improve society, not deteriorate society.
Right. Or fulfill
Yeah.
some biological desire, need.
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Fulfill some groups prospects over another groups
Of
another
course.
groups. Yeah. There's
Right.
a lot of different reasons why societal changes can take place. It just whether or not it is a objective fact like of the natural world is irrelevant. Completely irrelevant.
Well, yeah.
And I own you. What
Right.
what do you
Well, look, it's relevant in the enforcement of it. Okay, we've already. I agree. Obviously, it's relevant there, but they're not having a explicit conversation about this is relevant because we need people to believe this useful fiction so that they don't do horrible things and we can
Right.
save money on a police force.
Right.
Like that's the conversation you could have about it. That's not the conversation that they are having. He's trying to say, because it's not a fact of the natural world, you shouldn't believe it.
Mhm.
Right?
Well, I think he's just saying it's just anyone can change it. Again, it's all just about the enforcement.
That's
Good
exactly
point.
right. What if we
Okay.
change the social construction of ownership to mean you can own a person? Does that mean that people no longer own themselves?
Well, the difference here, right, is that and it's the word that I mentioned that
Well, people would still own themselves. The way that it would change is people would be able to sell themselves to other people. So,
Well, that's one form of slavery, right? There's other forms where you don't have the option to do that. You can just get kidnapped, right?
sure.
And
Yeah.
sold against your wishes.
In the libertarian world, I think they'd be more like like in the libertarian framework, you could, and I've even heard some libertarians argue this, that you should be able to sell yourself into slavery. So they still believe that you own yourself, though. That's where it
Mhm.
begins. Because
Sure.
that's like their major axiom.
Well, but
I
it's
see
kind of
what
like
you're saying.
it doesn't. There is this like contention between and I think this is actually Andrew sort of puts himself in a weird corner here, and Dave actually brings this up, and people kind of miss this, and I think it actually exposes a weakness in sort of Andrew's argument, which is, he says, well, okay, if we agree that ownership is a social construct, so even if you believe right now, Dave Smith, that you own yourself, if society at large changes their definition of ownership to mean that you could own a person, doesn't that mean that your idea of self-ownership is like wrong or weak or whatever? And there's like kind of a response to this that's essentially like, David doesn't say this exactly, but what the retort should be is, well, no, Dave Smith's idea about self-ownership that he believes in would remain unchanged. It's just that a majority of people have changed their definition, and since they have the power, they can enforce their will upon everyone else.
Right.
And
It's-
and the problem with bringing up that argument is that that's the exact same thing is true under Andrew's situation. If he believes in a situation based on Christian dogma, and he believes, something like, let's just use gay marriage. He says that people that are gay should not be allowed to get gay marriage. But then the majority of Christians who rule society then dictate and say, well, we've changed our mind. We believe Christian dogma actually says gays should be able to get married. Then they can enforce their will upon Andrew, and he's back in the place where he started from.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
the
that's-
enforcement mechanism, and that's why like this is all kind of silly, is because at the end of the day, when we're talking about like objective morality and enforcement and all this other shit, at the end of the day, the weird like truth is that, you know, might makes right in terms of whatever moral system society is going to live under. Now, fortunately, or for us, you'd want your might makes right to be operating under a system of like individual rights for people, natural rights for people, inalienable rights for people, and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, if the majority of people through violence that had might decided they wanted to live in some other society, then you have to go to war to, you know, with might to stop that.
Yeah, to change that. Well,
Yeah.
very, very well put. Yeah. Without law enforcement, there really is no law. So
Right. But just like when these conversations, and you were right when you said this earlier, the enforcement mechanism constantly gets conflated and mixed in with the ideology itself.
yeah,
that you didn't is that I would say that ownership would imply that you're justified in that claim.
How are you justified in that claim?
How am I justified in the claim of owning myself?
Yeah, you just said if you agreed it's
Okay.
a social construction. So if we agree that it's a social construction, then we can own other people as via a social construction. That would be justified.
Well, I don't think so. So the major difference there, right, is that as we're having this conversation, and clearly,
see, that's another thing that is weird about this, because people make this assertion that you can just change the rules of society like willy-nilly without actually engaging in the details of how you change those rules, which you laid out perfectly, right? Obviously, in a democratic system, you've got the majority has a huge amount of influence on changing the power structure. But also in America, thankfully, we have the Bill of Rights, which protects the individual from the whims of the majority to a large extent. So this whole idea that, you know, we can just change things willy-nilly, and if things aren't objectively true, then, you know, someone might just sneeze and something change. It just doesn't take reality into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
really, what's the goal here? To persuade, probably not to persuade each other, but at least to persuade the audience who's listening to us, because we recognize that they are in control. Forget the word own, because that's triggering, evidently, but they are
not triggered by the word own.
Okay. When I say triggering, meaning that's going to start a whole nother debate about semantics. So
yeah, but semantics are important in a debate.
Okay, well, all right. Let's not do this tactic of interrupting every 2 seconds. So let me just finish my point here. So we are both presuming that the people who are listening to this are in control of their own thoughts, and we could potentially persuade them toward our cause. And so if we're doing all of this, we kind of are recognizing in some sense that it's more valuable to persuade people than it is to, I don't know, just enforce our will on them. And so in that sense, I would say that, yes, there is some kind of norm that there's a justifiable path where you can persuade people versus force them.
Sure. Well, I agree that you can persuade all sorts of people, and that can be part of a societal norm, and that everybody can agree that that's part of a societal norm. Right. That does not demonstrate that you own yourself. Thus, the key principle for the non-aggression principle, which is self-ownership, that's where the violation comes in. Do people own themselves? Is that a justified position, or isn't it?
And it's only justified if it's objective, like gravity is objective. This is so weird. It's just like so weird.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that, yes, I think it is. But again,
then can you demonstrate it?
Well, what would you mean by that? What would it mean to demonstrate that you own yourself?
You would have to prove that you own yourself.
That I can control myself, or what? Again, just be clear about what you're asking.
Well, here, let me give you an example. Yeah, I'll give you an example to the contrary. I have seen throughout all of human history that human beings.
What Dave should ask for, and he was almost on the verge of it, and I don't know if you can answer, is to say, like, you're asking me to prove something. Like, tell me what an example would be of someone proving that they have self-ownership. What would that look like to you? Because if you can't describe the concept, then no one can prove it to you, right? If you don't even have a concept of what it means to prove this, then how could anyone prove it to you?
Yeah. Well, he wants to prove that it's a social convention, which, okay, it is a social. I mean,
well, no, but see, because and then yes, exactly. But then the example he gives doesn't even really address it, because he says like, well, I can disprove it because there have been times in history where people have owned slaves. And it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily disprove the concept of self-ownership. It, just proves that there's a concept of force, and might makes right.
Well, it proves that the social convention was different.
Well, no, but even then, you could define self-ownership like, and this is, I think, actually kind of the weakness in Andrew's argument here, is because you could say, well, how could he prove that like under that same argument, you could say, well, how can you prove Christianity is true when there have been times in periods in history where Christians have been subjugated and killed and not allowed to practice their faith, right? Like, just because you can't manifest your ideology that you believe, even if you believe your ideology is objectively true or based on objective truth, just because you can't manifest it in the physical world, that doesn't mean that it's not, quote, true, right?
Well, he means true in like an objective sense.
Well, that's fine, but then no ideology is, quote, objectively true beyond
that's my point. That is exactly my point. Yeah.
Right.
There is, all ideologies are a social convention.
Right.
Yes. So he keeps asking him to prove, in a logic sense, that this is a moral fact. You own yourself. This is a fact. And then he says, look, there are times when people didn't own themselves, so it's obviously not a fact. It's like, it's a social convention. Back then, the social convention was different. But you're exactly right that the might makes right is always ever present to enforce whatever moral, whatever social convention there is at the time. I mean, we like to tell ourselves, because we come up with a lot of different ways to make people voluntarily opt in, right? But when push comes to shove, it really is. This is a social convention you're going to obey, right? And I'm glad we live in a society where the social convention is you own yourself, right?
Yes.
Andrew is upset that he lives in a society that the social convention is you own yourself because it allows gay people to get married.
Right. Well, yeah. And I think it would be I think this conversation would have been more productive, or I guess interesting, maybe, unless you're just interested in watching, the slap fight, in terms of kind of moving past this argument and then him just challenging Dave on sort of like the actual, like, because this argument's all secondary. This is all the secondary argument. The primary argument that he wants to levy is that libertarian principles can't prevent degeneracy, right? And that, to me, they should have skipped all this and get directly into the primary argument, which is how does libertarian ideology, philosophy, principles, how do you prevent, these things that I, quote, consider degenerate?
But this part to me is amazing because, I mean, it's just such a non sequitur, and he keeps hammering on it. Like, even if he could prove that it's a property of the physical world, like,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Like, death is a property of the physical world, and death is often like a part of various moral systems and whatnot.
Right.
So
that's why, and people, they get all up in a tizzy whenever I say this, but I say the conversation of objective morality is a dumb conversation because we don't know what happens when you die.
Right.
Because that actually is because if the Christians are right and there's this system of heaven and hell, and God has sort of this, you can do whatever you want in the physical world, but then God dictates what happens to your soul afterwards, and there's a set of rules that you have to live by according to God's whim to get into heaven or hell, then that changes then you could make an argument about objective morality completely. You could say, well, my morality is not based on a social construct, because there's a literal force that forces you to do X, Y, Z. But then again, you get into the exact problem I say, which is, well, that at the end of the day, all it is might makes right. Just saying that God is the one that has the ultimate might. So,
but God is a lot cheaper because, I mean, we don't have to pay God, right?
Right. Well, you do through, whatever your belief system is,
through
So.
tithing and whatnot.
or the actions that you do in the world.
Beings seem to be able to own other human beings without much
Sure.
problem. That doesn't seem to be a problem. As long as the social construction of ownership of the time states that you can own another person, you seem to be able to just fine.
Right.
So this axiom of self-ownership is not obvious to me. To be an axiom, it has to be
So what
self-apparent and
hold on.
self-obvious.
So what demonstrated that people owned other people throughout time? Prove that to me. The same way you just said to me, prove to me that
but I did,
own myself.
But I did.
No. Hold on.
I'll prove it to you again.
Well, hold on. Let's try to not. We're only a couple minutes.
You
into this, so
interrupted me. I didn't interrupt you.
Well, hold on. You just asked me to prove that I own myself, and then you asserted that throughout history people owned other people. So prove that.
Yeah, but we already did. And let me explain how. You and I already agreed that ownership is a social construction, and that throughout history, the social construction had changed where people were able to own other people via the social construct. So whatever the social construct is of the day, that's all it is. As long as you agree that ownership is a social construction, you basically have to bite that bullet, right?
Wait, no, I'm not even understanding what you're saying here. So we agreed it was a social construct, and then your next statement after that was, prove to me that you own yourself.
Yeah, a social construction doesn't exist in objective reality.
Right.
It's
so
a term.
Prove to me that anyone ever owned someone else throughout history. And
He's so close. He's so close. I just wanted to say, look.
Well, social constructs do exist in objective reality. That's not the right phrasing.
Of course they do. Of course they do. Once everyone agrees, look, laws are basically objective, right? That's why we write them down in such detail.
Right. Money exists as an objective reality, that is still a social construct. Right.
Yes.
It could be changed, but it's still, I don't know, maybe it was a misspeak or something. It's just, that was not the right way to phrase it. But
yeah, I think emergent facts is kind of the best term for that.
Maybe,
because as soon as like the price of gold is an emergent fact. I mean, it's an objective fact, but it emerges through this social system, right?
Yes.
Through governed by rules that are social constructs. But the whole idea that it's a social construct, this is what's so hilarious about this exchange to me, because I want Dave to say, well, why does the fact that it's a social construct change the outcomes of society? I mean, I want Andrew to try to have to answer that. Why something being objective makes such a difference to him.
Right. And all you said was it was a social construct.
You mean like a contract of ownership between slaves or something?
No, it's your question. So you tell me how to answer
my claim is that ownership is a social construction. Do you agree or disagree with that claim?
Agree.
I think it is a social construct, but there also can be ethical and non-ethical, or moral and immoral.
Well, then if you make the
ownership.
assertion that it's anything more than a social construction, then the burden of claim is on you to demonstrate how it could be.
Well, okay. I mean,
so he would probably say that his moral framework is objective, and then go into some objective morality spiel.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess.
We can move. I just want to get past him biting the bullet on the social construction thing. Then we'll move forward.
Again, you're dodging my question here. I asked you the same question you asked me, and you weren't able to answer it either. By the way, part of the reason why I asked is because I don't exactly understand the question you're asking me. Are you asking me to say why I think, how I could prove that it is moral that one person should own themselves rather than someone else own them? Is that
that's not the question. So here's the question. Let me explain it to you.
Okay.
The non-aggression principle itself revolves around the idea that human beings own themselves, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the thing is that you and I can agree that there's been tons and tons of slavery throughout human history, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So those people clearly own these other people. So this has to be a social construction of agreement is what is ownership. We agree that you own it, therefore you own it. What I'm asking for is some type of justified evidence that that is not the case, and that there is some moral ought or some type of demonstration, philosophically or otherwise, that a human being actually owns themselves.
Okay. So just to be clear here, if I were to say, if you're saying ownership meaning just strictly control over who has something, then yes, there have been lots of times where people can come just take all your stuff and then claim they own it. And if you're saying the law recognizes it or the society recognizes it, then essentially they own it. So
They can do that with people too, right?
Right. And in a sense, I agree with you. And that
So then
that
you
is
don't own
happening.
yourself.
Okay. Let me just finish what I'm saying.
Okay, go.
The social look, just because it's a social convention doesn't change the social convention.
Right.
It doesn't change it.
Right.
Go ahead.
Anyway, we can move forward. Let me see what I got. So they continued this tact for, I believe, an hour, which is just like super, super fascinating. I can't figure out why anybody just doesn't say, yeah, just because it's a social construct.
Well, that's why I said Dave is unequipped to have this conversation. Is because why doesn't he just cut through the noise and just try to get to the bottom of whatever this is about?
Well, I think Andrew's being somewhat evasive as well. Like he
Well, he is,
never
'cause
comes out and
he is.
explicitly says, well, if your moral system isn't objective, then that means it's bogus because you can just change it at any time.
Mhm.
All moral systems must be objective. They must be properties of the natural world. Otherwise, they suck. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And my moral system is objective and a property
Right.
of the natural world. And I can show you how here. I
Wait,
think
bef-
Dave is way equipped to have that conversation.
Before you go to 5148, I think this is the part. I'm not exactly sure this is the part, but I think this is the part that I was thinking of.
Okay. The chicken part?
Like the subjective God part.
Okay.
Basis is
Okay, fine, Dave. I'll make it.
And then I asked you what that means, and you
And
said
I just
nothing.
explained.
No, you didn't.
Yeah,
You
I
just
did.
said that you think my basis is
Okay,
subjective.
fine, Dave. I'll make it
What's
super
yours?
simple because God tells me so. Is that better for you?
Sure. No, if
Okay.
that's the answer. That's
Oh my God.
Well, let me just let
What
it
if
play
God
out.
tells you incorrectly though?
Right.
God tells me a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly.
that I can't repeat.
Right.
That's the answer.
Okay,
God tells me
God
so.
tells you.
Yeah.
Like, and through what means does God tell you this?
He directly communicates right into my brain. He's like, that shit's wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So just to be clear, the point of that is that, Andrew, it sounds very good when you attack someone and say that's subjective, but when your response to that is God communicates directly into my brain, that also, I mean, I don't know what the word is for that.
Subjective.
But
it would be
subjective
subjective.
would probably
That's the-
be the word.
But that's my whole point. That's how I'm granting your entire argument. It's like, it doesn't matter ultimately,
Okay,
objectively.
but your counter is also subjective. So then
Right.
we're
So
even.
then that means that my preference is no worse than your own preference.
Well, I mean, no, it means by your argument, we're even.
Yeah. If,
Not by my
if
argument,
I'm using
by
preference-based
your argument. Okay,
yeah, if,
all right, all
if
right.
I'm using preference-based arguments, or I'm sorry, preference-based morality, and you're using prepreference-based morality,
No, listen.
then we're equal, Dave.
To be clear, I don't think I am using preference-based more.
Well, see, but that's why this whole conversation seems weird because it sounds like he's biting the bullet, unless this is part of a hypothetical argument that is not exactly his argument. But it sounds like he's biting the bullet that all this stuff is just his preference. He's saying, well, all your stuff is your preference, all stuff's my preference. Like, okay, so what?
Yeah. So what?
So anyway, we could jump ahead to the part you want to jump ahead.
So weird. 51-55. Here we go.
Can you rephrase the question? What is it exactly you're asking me?
I'm asking you, if we reach anarcho-utopia, we scale the government
I'm
down.
not for a utopia, but
Okay,
so
but
whatever.
if we reach anarcho, whatever you want, as the ultimate, right? The government is now scaled down to the point where it's essentially gone, right?
Mhm.
Would you still want enforcement against this kind of thing? And how could you have enforcement against it without a government?
What against what kind of thing?
Like incest or gay
Okay,
marriage or
sure.
any of these degenerate actions?
Okay, well, I think there's a pretty big gap between incest and gay marriage, but I will say that
What?
I think
Look at this. Dave is like saying, there's a difference between those two things.
Mhm.
Andrew's like, no, there's not.
there's a gap between
What
that,
is it?
but I think they're two different things.
Yeah, they're two different things, but they're the same as far as two consenting adults doing what they want, right?
Yeah, me and you doing this debate are also two consenting adults doing what they want, but there's a gap between those things. So anyway,
What does that have to do? I mean,
Oh my
logically,
God.
That's such a great response. That is such a great response.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah. But I think it totally goes over Andrew's head. He's like, what do you mean? Us doing this debate is exactly like incest.
tracks that if we got, dude, you can't go on these long rambling diatribes, and I do 4 seconds. I do 4 seconds, and you go berserk. Just calm down. Let me ask the actual question,
dude. Come on, man. I asked you to clarify your question, and
I'm trying to clarify it so that you understand it.
But don't act like I'm going on these long rants and you're not talking. I mean,
well,
come
you
on,
filibuster.
dude.
You don't say that much, but I'm still willing to engage.
Oh, come on, Andrew. You're
I'm
full of
super
shit, dude. Whatever.
concise. So I'm super concise.
Okay.
I'm going to get right to it, right, so that you understand what I'm saying to you. What I'm asking you is that the enforcement mechanism against this degeneracy, which you consider to be morally wrong, absent a state, are you still going to want an enforcement mechanism against these moral wrongs? You say, there's a big difference between incest and homosexual marriage or homosexual sex. However, the truth is that both of these things are exactly logically similar when it comes to two consenting adults doing what it is that they want when they want to do it without hurting anybody else. How's that not the case?
Just like the debate. Exactly like the debate.
Well, again, as I just pointed out, we're also two consenting adults doing what we want without hurting anyone else. But I think that's very different. So I'm just saying that I'm not even saying I support either of those things. I'm saying I see them as different. No, the truth is that if we didn't have.
I think smoking should be illegal, Sitch. What do you think?
Sure. Why not?
Yeah.
But only
definitely be
nicotine,
illegal.
right? You should. Pot's still
Oh
legal.
yeah, pot is still very legal. Pot,
Yeah,
that
we're
should
gonna
be
do the reverse.
mandatory.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Mandatory. I like it. Yeah.
It's just so funny. Well, look, we don't have to go any further. I thought this was interesting. Do you want to weigh in on this portion of the debate?
Well, I guess the only other thing I had to say about all this is that I think that people who are kind of coming from Andrew's position here, there's like an idea, it seems like, in their minds that I'm guessing this is his argument because they don't really get into it. The part that I heard is that the flexibility, the permissiveness of libertarian ideology is what allows like these degenerate acts to be allowed in society because the philosophy doesn't have a proper way to prevent those acts from, to say that those acts are wrong, essentially. Like that's the base argument.
True.
And so,
That's
and so they say,
accurate.
right. They say we need to get rid of libertarianism. We need to get rid of liberalism because it's too permissive of allowing, quote, degeneracy. We need to adopt this very rigid, inflexible ideology that's based on like Christianity or whatever, right? Whatever thing you want to base it off of. And I think that this way of thinking is fundamentally flawed because I would argue that inflexibility actually has a greater chance, or at least the same chance, to leading to degeneracy as any other ideology. Because they kind of act like if they could find the perfect inflexible, rigid ideology, it would just be cemented in society and then go forward forever and never change. And obviously, we know for a fact that that's not true because that's never how it has been in history. For most of human history, there's been some kind of authoritarian, more rigid, more inflexible ideology that's been implemented by force, by might makes right, onto society. And then it changes over time for two reasons. One, it has to change because technology and the environment changes, and the ideology has to change to keep up with that, because if it doesn't, it will fall apart. It will break. If it's too rigid, if your social rules are too rigid, there's no give to them. There's no bend to them. And when the environment pressures them, they will break. So either there's an environmental change, there's a technological change that requires society to rule, or people just get fucking sick and tired of living under like a very rigid society and they revolt. And so this whole like idea that we just have to find the perfectly rigid, magical social rules to live under, to me, is a fantasy utopia that's on the same level of like the communist utopia. That if you can just, find the right way of banning private property from people, then everything will be fine. It's like, no, that's never how any of this is going to work.
Yeah, there's an ideology of wokeness that I think Andrew would call degenerate that's being forced on people
Right.
against their will. So yeah, look, I completely agree with you. Society has to be flexible because the environment changes, and that's how cultural evolution works. Yeah, I've read this quote before, but I'll read it again because I think it's apt. I think it's important, and it kind of lays out the difference between the left and the right. Social cohesion is a necessity, and mankind has never yet succeeded in enforcing cohesion by merely rational arguments. Every community is exposed to two opposite dangers: ossification through too much discipline and reverence for tradition on the one hand, and on the other hand, disillusion or subjection to foreign conquests through a growth of individualism and personal experience that makes cooperation impossible.
Mm-hmm.
That's so right on the money.
Right. Yeah. That's your base centrism. Yeah.
Yeah. We're constantly, we have these two opposing forces constantly pulling at us. We've got order, which, we like, and we've got freedom, which we like.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Right. Exactly. That's what I was saying. Like looking, when you have these like arguments through the lens of pure ideology, it's dumb because you need to find a balance between these two things. Right. Now you can make the argument and say, okay, well, I think we're too much in favor of, we're too far on the side of liberty or too far on the side of order or whatever. That's fine. But just people don't want to do that. They want to root their philosophy in an extreme and then say, okay, this is the answer. It's like, that's not how any of this works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. I get it. I understand where Andrew and a lot of people who agree with Andrew are coming from. Like their moral aesthetic is really, they have a strong sensitivity to homosexuality, and that bleeds into the topic of gay marriage and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks that we, the people on the left who are, pride themselves on being so empathetic are not really empathetic about that. Like a lot of the stuff, turning pride into a fucking month, like a lot of the stuff that they're doing is really designed to make people like Andrew's disgust reflex just go out of control.
Of course.
I don't know why I don't understand why they have to do that. I wish they would have some respect for, the whole idea of live and let live. I mean, that applies to them as well.
Because these things are being foisted upon us by essentially the Democrats either adopting it for cynical purposes or stupid purposes, because they're basically getting tricked into supporting socialist causes that want to see them destroyed as well. And they just don't realize it, or they're just using it to attack the right in a cynical manner.
I don't necessarily know that it's socialism as much as it's just tribalism, like root tribalism. I think a lot of the people who celebrate pride and do, they're all for the
It's saying you're on the right side of politics. Yeah. It's not even about pride itself. I mean, about the gay shit itself. Yeah.
They're saying, no, I think that they know that kind of stuff disgusts certain people that they see as their political adversaries. And they get off on it in the same way that, they like, it's fun to like taunt people and.
No. Yeah, I agree with 100%. But I guess what I mean when I say socialism is that, under the liberal framework, it is a live and let live attitude. It is an attitude of like not wanting to necessarily discuss other people or rub shit in other people's face. That is the liberal attitude. But it's the socialist attitude to say, okay, well, these people are in the moral wrong here. because they're the oppressor class. I'm in the moral
Oh,
righteous
yeah,
class because I'm the oppressed class. Therefore, you should relish in sort of the tribalism of rubbing this shit in people's faces to disgust them and annoy them.
Because
and then a
they're
bunch of
oppressor class and they have it
right,
coming.
exactly. And
Yeah,
then a
I
bunch of
get it.
people, and then a bunch of people to the left jump in, and they're like, I don't even know for a lot of the price of, I don't even think a lot of the people that are not gay or queer or even they don't even like. I think they perceive it mostly as what you're saying, just to piss off the right or to virtue signal that they're on the right side of politics more than really even giving a shit about some gay issue or trans issue or whatever.
Yeah.
So
You mean whenever I hear socialism, I always think of it in terms of economics, but you mean like cultural Marxism.
cultural Marxism, of course. Yeah, well, I mean,
the oppressor oppressed
of course.
lens.
Well, I mean, there's
Yeah.
not, I mean, right now, there's only a handful of, classical economic socialists running around in the discourse anyway. Everyone's kind of manifesting the cultural woke, cultural Marxism
A
kind of form of
handful?
socialism.
There's one. It's Ben Burgess.
And Richard Wolff.
Oh, yeah.
There's two.
There's two. We
There's
know
two of
both
them.
of them.
Yeah, there you go.
Hilarious.
Okay.
All right.
Maybe some supers. Okay, where did we end here? Cameraman 502 for $5 says, based on the debate question, Andrew doesn't need to prove his ideology is better, just that Dave's isn't better. Dave's now, by the way, a rock and a hard place. Well, what was the? Oh, are you saying that because if the question is just is libertarianism better than Christian populism, you're saying like definitionally? I mean, I guess you could say that. I think it's kind of lame when like someone just says, well, I framed the debate question or the topic in such a way that I get to sit on my hands and you have to do all the work. It's like, oh, well, then I'm just going to leave, right? Because it's not really like a real conversation at that point. So,
Yeah.
Mike Cassandra for $5 says, it's my birthday. A team reigns supreme and S class is there.
Sweet. Happy birthday, man.
I mean, I would say happy birthday, but I'm just here. So, I'll let Adam do that.
Wish him a happy birthday. Be magnanimous. Come on. Is S class not magnanimous?
Happy birthday, Mike. You dirty, dirty Assange. Okay. Anyways. Brian for $10 says, I disagree that morals are a social construction. While a moral system can be constructed outside of reality, there is a reality that moral systems rest upon, and so there is an objective morality. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. While a moral system can be constructed outside of reality, there is a reality that moral systems rest upon, and so there is an objective morality. The problem is, and this always goes into the thing that triggers Adam, or I should say Adam doesn't like, when I say universal objective morality versus local
objective
morality, which is like, so if you set a goal and you say, okay, the goal of my moral system is to do X, right? The goal of my moral system is to do Y. Then you could construct an objective moral system where there is a best way to accomplish whatever that goal is. If that's what you mean, then I agree with that. But the goal, that's still not an objective. That's not based on objective morality. That's still your or someone's subjective opinion to make that the goal of the moral system. If that makes sense.
I think the objective is kind of nested in reality fundamentally too, because it's an evolved objective. It's our group thrives. Like that's the objective. And a moral system is just
what
a
thriving
system
means is like subjective, right?
No, I don't think it is.
Well, because from
how
a
is
purely
thriving subjective?
Because from like if we're going to say like our moral system should be based purely on like biology, so purely on evolution, reproduction,
surviving
right?
over time,
right. So then that would mean that the most moral society would be a society like the Matrix, where a bunch of robots put people in tubes where they can never be harmed and just keep spreading their DNA, and people are just born into captivity forever. That way to prevent, to make sure that everyone. Well, that's why I said thrive is a subjective term.
You know who's thriving in that system? The robots, because they do whatever they want. They have the
but what if the
freedom? Freedom is a component.
Why?
Of thriving.
Not in terms of an evolutionary perspective. It's not.
Yes, it is.
How so?
How's it not?
I said from just like purely spreading your DNA. It has
The
has nothing to do with freedom.
ability to spread out into the environment, that's not.
No.
Of course it is.
How? It's not. That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying even if you can't, you don't
Such
want to
as,
root.
like, the best moral system is the Matrix.
No. Don't straw man me. I said if you're going to say that your moral system is rooted on the biological evalued process.
Oh, I said they
which
all
is,
are, though.
Which is
it's just not
I-
mine. All
no,
of
no.
them.
I understand. But I understand what you mean, but you have to understand what I mean. I'm saying if you're saying that the end goal is just like evolution, you got to make sure you spread your seed. There's a lot of systems that could do that in very efficient ways that we would all look at and say that is an immoral, bad way to live, such as like the Matrix.
Yeah, but that's not what I said, though. I said thriving.
But that's why I said that's why I said it's subjective in terms what you mean by
you're
thrive
saying
is a
thrive
subjective
is
quality.
subjective, yeah.
Yes.
I don't think it is. I think
Okay.
it's less subjective than people make it out to be. I think people would look at what you obviously you're saying, look, I can dream up a system where everyone is living forever. That's a nightmare, a hellish nightmare.
Sure.
I think people would immediately say, well, that's not thriving. They would say that's not in the category of thriving.
Well, it comes back to a hypothetical I posed a few weeks ago, which was like, would the most moral system be that everyone lives in the Matrix, they're safe from harm, but it's like the good Matrix where you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But you're not in a real world. You're living, in your little virtual reality thing.
Okay.
And you're all just living you're never actually moving around. You're living in a tube forever.
I mean, that could be thriving.
Well, exactly. But a lot of people would find that morally reprehensible.
Sure.
So that's why I'm saying it's a subjective question. I don't think there is an objective answer to that unless you know what happens after you die, which is why I keep saying that. Okay. That Don Kidda for 15 months says, here you go, Sitch. Thank you so much, Kidda, for the 15 months, despite being a dirty, dirty sticker. Look at all those chopsticks.
Oh, I know. She's doing it. She's rubbing it in your face. She's taunting you. She's teasing you.
Andrew Haskins for 17 months says the reason the moralists demand state power is because they understand that they don't have persuasive power, mostly due to their self-righteousness. There you go. Drew Diamond for 19 months says, Adam, you should unblock and or contact Andrew and let him respond to the authoritarian accusations. A-team is somewhat cooler than S-class.
What? Oh. I mean, how do you respond to the authoritarian accusations?
When you say I'm not authoritarian, how dare you?
Okay, look, if he believes that, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, I'm entitled to my opinion. So, and I don't, whatever he says, I don't think he's going to convince me otherwise. So he can respond if he wants to respond.
Spencer for 5 months says, as always, S-class is the best class. Thank you. Also, this conversation feels like it needs Sargon or Rags to come in. I don't know why, but I think I need it. I don't know. I mean, we've had this literal conversation with Sargon a million times.
True.
I don't think we've ever had the conversation with Rags, so I don't know what his take on it is.
I think Rags leans more to the degeneracy camp.
Yeah, maybe. I think, I don't know. I'm not sure where he is on that one. So I'm assuming he's in favor of, I thought when we talked about it, he's pretty libertarian.
Yeah.
So. Brian for $50. Thanks so much, Brian. Says, I disagree. Self-ownership of my body is not something we impose, but something we describe. It's my decision to type this comment because I own myself. There must be a distinction between descriptive reality and a pure social construction.
Well, $50. I mean, who am I to argue with that?
There you go. That's true. So a lot of this conversation about when someone's saying is something a social construct or not, part of the reason I hate it is eventually when you keep arguing it and you keep deconstructing it, it gets down to Sitch's law. It gets down to how are we describing the concept? You can describe self-ownership in some way, or let me be more clear. You can define self-ownership in such a way that you say it is some sort of natural principle of reality, and then someone else can just define it differently. And then people just argue about whose definition is the correct definition. Right. And
Funny that definitions are a social construct, a social convention, like all these things as well, right?
Right. And so even like kind of like the way that you seem to be describing it, Brian, you say, okay, self-ownership is part of my body. It's not something we impose, but something we describe. It's my decision to type this comment because I own myself. It's like, well, what does that even mean? So like when if someone is inebriated and they make a decision to do something they wouldn't do sober, is that their self-ownership?
No, that's owned by the alcohol, Sitch.
Well, I don't know.
Obviously.
Or is it different because you're only doing that thing because you have a chemical in your body, right? That's making you do that thing that you wouldn't normally do.
Have you heard the phrase, the alcohol is talking?
I have.
Well, there you go.
Have you heard the phrase, you're thinking with your dick?
Oh yeah, I hear that all the time.
Right, because that's another very powerful chemical intoxicant that, when you get horny, it floods your brains with chemicals and makes you do things that you wouldn't naturally do. When you're hungry, it's the whole hangry thing. When you're hungry, you do things you wouldn't naturally do. There's all these neurotransmitters in your stomach that are influenced not only by whether you're hungry or not, but what you're eating. Brian says that that's self-ownership. Okay, so I guess you could define it that anything that you do without an external force, I guess, impacting you self-ownership. Okay. But then it just becomes a definition argument. So.
Right. Yeah.
Drew Dodman for $2 says, if morals are subjective, you can't make moral arguments. Of course you can. What do you mean?
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Brian for $20 says, I disagree. Might does not make right. Might makes subjugation. You don't need to know what happens to you after you die. You just need to understand that there is a reality and there are moral systems that align with it. So to be clear, when I say might makes right, I should be more specific. I don't mean that whatever the strong, and this is kind of what got in that stupid argument with whatever his name is. I don't mean that might is creating the moral system. I just mean that, like, at the end of the day, force is what's going to dictate the flow of whatever social philosophical system that everyone adheres to. That's all I mean by that. I mean right in terms of what manifests, not in terms of right, what is right morally according to my will. And you do need to know what happens after you die.
This is why I said
because people are following moral questions based on an understanding of reality that's based on what happens after you die. And if people don't agree on that, then there can't be, or don't know the answer to that question objectively, then you can't have an objectively moral system because we can't even agree or process what objective morality even looks like.
I think the problem with the word might is a lot of people think of it as physical force. When I say without law enforcement, there is no law, what I mean is whatever moral system you come up with, whatever set of rules that everyone in society has to follow, you are going to have to enforce those rules. Otherwise, the moral system is not going to function as it should. So the enforcement mechanism could be physical force. Oftentimes it is in cases of like murder, rape, things like that. But there's also, people can opt in. They can follow the rules of their own volition, not lying, not cheating on their spouse or not cheating on their girlfriend. But that still is a form of cultural might to set up a system where people want to opt into it and enforce the rules via, cultural pressure or even cultural enticement. There's carrots and sticks.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be good because it's kind of hard to have these conversations via like super chat, because I understand like it's especially when it's like a complicated conversation via, objective morality or something. But if you want, Brian, if you want to come on like next week, maybe we can have a conversation.
Yeah, sure.
About, like objective morality and these things, because
I love talking about morality. Yeah.
Yeah. Estif Favola for $20. Thank you. Says you can't impose infinite plasticity on the definition of own while using own in your argument. It's like defining a word using the word, semantic division by 0.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah, that is true. And thank you for the first ever super chat.
Yeah, that was what was kind of frustrating about Andrew. Like, it seemed like so much rested on this axiom, and then he just is like, yeah, well, my moral system's subjective too.
Cameraman 502 for $2 says, if they're both subjective, Andrew wins. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Cameraman, because that actually explains the behavior, which I didn't even think about. And I'm going to be real, I don't think the majority of people watching think about, which is if there's this like, if the debate, if you're arguing it something, like there's an argument and then there's the argument that you're having literally, and then there's like the argument that everyone is processing around it. And so the argument that the people watching this are processing is the argument of like libertarian values versus, Christian values, right? That's like the real argument.
Right.
But if you
Subjective morality versus objective morality.
or however, yeah, sure. And that's kind of the way it's processed. But if it's like, I'm glad you brought this up, Cameron, because I didn't even notice it. Like if the debate question is framed in such a way, so it's not really about that question. It's just about like, well, is one thing better than the other? Therefore, via the laws of logic, if I prove they're both subjective, I win the argument. It's like, okay, I guess you can do that. And the conversation will be 5 minutes long. And you say, congratulations, you won the argument. No one watching gives a shit because that's not really what the argument's about, right? That's not what people want to know about.
But if they're both, and they both admitted to being subjective, how do you say one is better than the other?
No, because like if the debate question is just, is libertarian better than Christian populism? And you just say, well, I've proven that they're both subjective and they're both your moral preference. Therefore, you can't prove it's better objectively than mine. Therefore, you lose the debate, right? Which is like an ultra debate nerd way of winning the conversation. And no one really cares because that's not, like no one cares about that argument, right? The argument's like the debate question exists as a way to have an argument about a topic that people care about.
You've basically proven that one is not better than the other.
From an objective moral standpoint.
Right.
Yes.
That's super weak.
Which is weak. And I would imagine it wasn't Dave Smith's purpose of having the conversation and wouldn't have agreed to the question if he was thinking of it in those terms at all.
That's so weak.
Because it's like dumb.
So
it's like,
weak.
oh, okay. It's like, oh, it's kind of like when, you talk to the socialists and they say like, oh, I'm just going to like redefine woman to mean what I think it means. So I automatically win the debate. And you go, well, that's just dumb. That's not really what anyone's talking about. So
one can't be better than the other because they're both subjective. What? That's so fucking weak.
Yeah, you could subjectively have something that produces an outcome most people find to be better than the other. So
that can't be how they were arguing it, though, because he was arguing Christian populism is better than libertarian.
Well, I don't know, because the parts I saw, he never actually argued that. And in the part that I played, he agreed that his preference was the religious preference was a subjective preference too.
Oh, wow.
So maybe that was the framework in which he was arguing the question, which if he was, I'd say that's foolish and stupid and a waste of everyone's time. But I guess it's not a waste of his time because, he gained a lot of clout from this debate because Dave Smith, couldn't really articulate the philosophical grounding of libertarianism. So, which makes him look really bad. So I guess it was a big win for Andrew.
Yeah. Andrew does a real good job of like maintaining his composure, staying calm, and appearing to win the debate stylistically. He's really good at that. I
don't know. It's hard because I guess I have a very different preference because, we only watched like a little bits of it, but the part, like a lot of the parts, like after what we started watching, like after that 20-minute mark, like there's so much interrupting. I feel like from Andrew, there's so much just like very obvious debate bro tactics trying to force Dave Smith in this like weird position when Dave Smith is just not equipped to have the conversation. Instead of him just saying like, this is what I'm saying, X, Y, Z, and this is what I'm asking you, ABC, as opposed to doing all these like weird, trying to like, I'm asking you this question to try to lead you in this trap, blah, 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 which always to me just smacks of like stupidity and obnoxiousness. So.
We're actually following the arguments. We're actually following along. I'm just saying, stylistically, if you're just following the vibe, Dave seems flustered and
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, and you're right. The vibe is, Dave Smith is confused and Andrew's like in control. So yeah, that's a good point. Albert for 6969 try. What is a try? I've never even heard of this before. Says this debate is slower than a 600-pounder mobility scooter. Yeah, it's pretty.
Those are slow?
They are.
What is a try?
It's a Turkish lira.
Oh, well, hello
There you
in
go.
Turkey.
Thank you. Good Supercross for $5. Thanks so much. Says the problem Dave is having is that the libertarianism requires self-ownership to be a priori. Ownership of the self is inherent to the philosophy. That is true. I do agree with that. That is true.
Yeah.
That's why I was kind of surprised that Dave seemed to be ill-equipped philosophically to have the conversation. That's
'Cause
why
that
everyone was
would
kind of
be-
surprised. They're like, okay, interesting.
Because that should be obvious, right?
Well, you would think that if you're like a big libertarian who's basically run for the candidate of the Libertarian Party, that you'd be able to articulate the philosophy in a very like intellectual and deep way in a conversation like this.
Right.
So Brian for another $10. Thank you, Brian. Says it is objectively true that we have genes that demand fair play. And under that objective reality, the morals of equality under the law is an objective moral truth.
Reciprocal altruism is definitely an objective moral truth.
What do you mean that we have genes that demand fair play?
We have genes that are tuned to desire, well, and demand. I mean, I've seen that video of that monkey when they give the one monkey the grape and they give the other monkey the cucumber, and the cucumber monkey is like, "Fuck you, give me a grape, you bitch."
Yeah, but so you have a biological, people have evolved to have a tendency to be able to recognize what they perceive as unfairness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
But, and you're saying this right now, there's not an objective definition of what fairness or unfairness even looks like.
Yeah, there is reciprocal altruism.
No, there's all the people on the left saying, hey, there's things are socially unfair, or economically unfair. We need to redistribute wealth from people, from the rich people, to make it more fair. And people on the right saying, no, it's unfair that you're taking my shit and giving it to other people. That's unfair. So there's not an objective agreement on what is fair.
They're still using reciprocal altruism. They're just doing it temporally instead of person to person. They're saying, look, you guys, you white straight men ruled society for hundreds of years. Now it's our turn. It's our turn.
No, I mean, I wasn't even, no way. I wasn't even
society.
Sure. I wasn't even talking about from a socialist perspective. I just meant from like even a left liberal perspective of saying there's too much wealth inequality, so we need to like raise taxes on the 1%, right? And then I guess the response you could say is, well, even if they can't agree on the metric, there's still a sense of unfairness, which I would say that's not even objective either, because that only exists because we live in kind of the society rooted in liberalism that we live in. If we lived in a society where, a more, I don't know, like a Mongolian horde-like society where you're like, fuck, I'm going to kill you and take your shit. I mean, obviously those people are not acting under a sense of objective fair play the same way that we would say is fair play.
They do within the tribe. Outside the tribe is all bets are off. But that's the whole point of morality. It evolved for the rules within the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
The rules, how you treat the other, are often very different.
Right.
So, and even, I mean, I read a book on Genghis Khan. They do reciprocal altruism quite well within the tribe.
That's interesting. Yeah.
When they go out and rape and pillage, they split all the women up equally, and they split all the stuff up equally among themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, but look, you do buy into reciprocal altruism, right? Obviously, that's like an evolved trait.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
My point is that just because you have an evolved tendency to something, that doesn't mean it's an objective morality. You can look at a society where people have caste system, divine right of kings, things of that nature, and those have existed for thousands of years. That doesn't mean that there's an objective moral system inherent on your genes. What you could say is that there are certain moral feelings that people have evolved to have over time.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I don't think that, but those things are not, those things are like vague. I don't think those things are specific enough to say, well, there's an objective moral answer there, because people have evolved to have these sort of feelings over time. And even if you have evolved to have them over time, because I would still say that that's not a proof of anything objectively moral. That just says because then you start to get into the naturalistic fallacy, right? You say,
Yeah.
well, just because something is natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good.
Gotta avoid that naturalistic fallacy.
So that's why my point is that but we can talk about it. Maybe it'd be interesting to talk about next week. So.
I was also thinking when we were talking about the environment changing, like the players within the moral system change too. And that those players, their moral sentiments or moral intuitions, they change over time as well. So it's like the whole soup is continually churning.
Sure. Right. So.
Yeah. Brian, reach out to me on Twitter if you want to come on next week and we can talk morality.
Pulsing for $6. Thank you so much. Or I'm sorry, Pulsing for $5 says I went to Pride in my area, and if you're ever in New England, you should attend to New York, Boston, or Providence and talk to people and visit the street fairs. It's quite the party. Okay. Solid for $2 says not all priests are pedos, but most are gay. Catholics have pretty good gaydar. By the way, I sent Adam a couple of videos about a more flexible alternative to the NAP. There you go.
Oh, cool.
Holstein for $6 says we might not be able to objectively agree on what thriving is, but I think we can generally agree on what it's not.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's what Jordan Peterson's always saying. Spencer Harmon wanted to come on too. So Spencer, if you're listening, we'd definitely get you on. So
Holstein for $5 says sophistry is the tongue of the devil, but you need to know it to counter it. Yeah, I agree, but that's why, that's why I said try to avoid Sitch's law as much as possible. Try to get to the root concept as opposed to sort of these definitional arguments, even though that is the majority of arguments that people engage in are these definition arguments.
Oh, and I hate it. I hate everything about it.
It's impossible to avoid, unfortunately. But
well, all you're arguing is this is the definition of a word, and I think you should adopt my definition. I think everyone should adopt my definition, but it's so pointless because that's not how things work.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
You got to adopt. You got to talk about the concepts. All right. Great show.
So
excellent show. Amazing show. Oh,
we're going to see you guys Thursday nights after the debates. Now, we're not going to stream the debate because supposedly they're going to be going after people with a iron fist for copyright violations.
Ooh, an iron
supposedly.
fist.
So we'll see. I'm sure some people will try.
Ouch.
They might get their channels struck. But so we will not be streaming the debate live. It's on CNN, I believe, and it's going to probably be on CNN's YouTube channel for free, so everyone can watch it for free on YouTube. And then after that, when it's over, we will do a stream.
Right, and we got a new channel, a new media channel. We streamed there for the first time last night, and it was great. A lot of you are enjoying it. So, How to Kill a Franchise, subscribe. We're going to continue to talk about media stuff over there. And only talk about politics over here. So
there you go.
There you
go. All right. Take care. See you tomorrow.
All right. Bye, everyone.